He was known by many names: Jeff Davis, Jack Allen, and Teddy Bedard. A man who was in and out of prison 9 times, he has since been labeled by scholars as one of the most destructive serial killers in American history. Today we discuss a historic serial killer at the turn of the 20th century, Carl Panzram. Let's open the serial killer file. Charles Carl Panzram was born on June 28, 1891, in East Grand Forks, Minnesota. His parents, John and Matilda Panzram, were immigrants from East Prussia. At a young age, John abandoned his family, leaving Matilda to work on the farm with only Carl and her 4 other children. At age 8, Carl was brought before a judge for intoxication. Then, at age 12, he was brought back to court again for robbery. Carl had stolen food and a revolver from a neighbor's home. Shortly thereafter, his parents sent him to the Minnesota State Training School, a brutal juvenile prison. Many speculate that this location is where Carl committed his first murder, although this rumor has yet to be verified. At the state training school, Carl's life would take a turn for the worst. He would be beaten by his fellow attendees, tortured, and even raped by staff at the institution. Eventually, his rage fueled, and he began his path as an arsonist by setting a fire in one of the buildings of the facility. When questioned, Carl lied to the powers of the institution. Regrettably, they believed his words, and he was consequently let free. Carl returned home and attended school once again, but sadly things never truly changed during his absence. He still hated his teacher and even threatened to kill him right in front of the entire class with a gun. However, before he could pull the trigger, his weapon fell out of his pocket, giving enough time for his teacher to push the gun out of Carl's distance. After his failed attempt at murdering his teacher, Carl abruptly decided to run away. As he rode on the trains through Minnesota during his journey into the unknown, Carl continued to learn more about the pain and suffering of his life. He would be repeatedly raped by strangers. He sought help, but the railroad cops would be of none, as they would merely continue to torture Carl. As time went on, he was arrested for burglary and brought back to another juvenile prison. In 1907, he escaped the prison with another inmate named Jimmy Benson and headed out west. During their travels, the two would rob churches, then set them on fire. In Carl's autobiography, he states the events as an old pastime. In his younger life, Carl blamed much of his hate and misery from the religion being forced upon him back in Minnesota. That same year, Carl was recruited into the United States Army while drinking at a Montana saloon. This, however, would be a very brief period in his life, as he was soon convicted of larceny and insubordination, spending 2 years in Fort Leavenworth's United States Disciplinary Barracks. Upon his release and dishonorable discharge from the Army, Carl returned to his life of theft and drifting, ending up back in prison many times. He took on different aliases and names while imprisoned in the various institutions, becoming known for often disobeying and attacking prison guards. This resulted in harsh punishments. The few times Carl did not commit crimes was during his time working as a strikebreaker. Additionally, he attempted to gain employment as a ship's steward on a U.S. Army transport vessel, but was discharged due to intoxication. Carl regarded himself as rage personified. Hulking in stature, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing 200 pounds, he owed his strength and size to the years of hard labor. He enjoyed dominating and intimidating, committing acts of arson and vandalism, in addition to robberies. On top of this, he became most well known for the rapes of the men he would rob. In Carl's mind, this was a form of control and domination. On June 1st, 1915, Carl successfully robbed a home in Astoria, Oregon, only to be caught attempting to sell some of the items that he had stolen. He was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment at Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. The prison's warden, Harry Minto, ruled the prison with an iron fist. He held the belief that prisoners should receive harsh punishment while confined, which often included beatings and isolation. Carl vowed to defy the warden and never see the full length of his sentence. Within his first year at Oregon State, Carl and his fellow inmate Otto Hooker escaped from the prison. While evading capture, Otto killed Warden Minto, making Carl an accessory to murder. After being recaptured and returned to prison, Carl was disciplined numerous times and spent 61 days in solitary confinement. He made a second escape attempt 2 years later on September 18, 1917. During this attempt, he engaged in 2 shootouts with police before his recapture. He shot and injured an officer during this ordeal, resulting in extra years added to his sentences. Carl finally escaped the prison once and for all on May 12, 1918 by sawing through his cell door's bars and catching an eastbound freight train. He shaved off his mustache and took the alias John O'Leary, setting off on his infamous murder spree. In 1920, Carl broke into the home of former United States President William Howard Taft in New Haven, Connecticut. Carl blamed Taft, who had been Secretary of War during Carl's time at Fort Leavenworth, and approved of his sentence for his time in military prison. Stealing a large amount of money and jewelry, he also stole Taft's .45 caliber Colt handgun. Using the stolen money, Carl purchased a yacht called the Akiska while in New York City. Carl kept the boat at the South Street Seaport and began utilizing the boat and location to lure sailors away from bars, inviting them to drink on his boat. He would rob, rape, and murder the men, dumping their bodies near Execution Rock's lighthouse in the Long Island Sound. He would continue this pattern for the next year, killing 10 men until running his yacht aground near Atlantic City, New Jersey, and sinking it. This allowed for his last 2 intended victims to flee the wreckage unharmed. After drifting for some time, as well as numerous incidents of fighting and a shootout with police, Carl stowed away on a ship to Africa, landing in Luanda, a city in the then Portuguese-occupied Angola. He took up working as a foreman on an oil rig for Sinclair Oil. During his stay in Angola, he found a young boy who was around 11 or 12 years old, wandering near the camp at the oil rig. He took the boy to a nearby gravel pit, sodomized him, and bludgeoned him to death remorselessly. Carl also claimed more lives, wherein he hired a canoe of 6 rowers to take him out to find crocodiles near Libido Bay. He then shot each of the rowers and threw their bodies to the crocodiles. Carl made his way back to America in 1922, plotting to steal another boat to pass off as his now wrecked yacht. He spent the next year selling drugs and traveling up and down the East Coast, eventually ending up in Salem, Massachusetts on July 18th. On this day, he happened to find 12-year-old George Henry McMahon, who was running an errand for his neighbor that day. Carl lured George away with an offer to give him money, which George complied to. However, once he got the boy to an isolated part of the town, he raped the boy numerous times and stuffed his mouth with newspapers before beating him to death, leaving his body under tree branches until he was discovered 3 days later. Carl eventually succeeded in stealing and repainting another boat to pass off as the Akiska, which he used to troll the Hudson River as a river pirate over the next year. On June 27, 1923, he later tried to sell off his yacht to another man, whom Carl shot twice in the head and claimed the man attempted to rob him during their transaction. Being arrested for this crime, Carl swindled his lawyer into accepting the stolen yacht as payment for getting Carl out on bail. Carl skipped town upon being released, making his way to Connecticut. He claimed to have raped and strangled an unnamed boy in New Haven during this time. Then, sometime in August, he murdered 14-year-old Alexander Lazak in Philadelphia before making his way back to New York State. On August 23rd, Carl was subdued and arrested during an attempted burglary of the Larchmont train depot under the alias John O'Leary. While in jail, he told police he was a wanted man in Oregon for shooting a police officer and escaping jail, but police didn't believe him. Carl pled guilty in exchange for a plea deal, which was not granted, and he was sentenced to 5 years at Clinton Correctional Facility, a notoriously harsh prison in Dannemora. Carl was released from Clinton in 1928. During his time, he was again subjected to abuse by the guards, and in turn abused other inmates. He attempted to kill a guard by clubbing him, attempted to firebomb workshops, and on one occasion suffered severe injuries in an escape attempt, for which he did not receive medical attention for an extensive period of time. On July 26th, shortly after his release, he wound up back in Philadelphia, where he killed 14-year-old Alexander Uzaki by strangling him to death. He set off on a rampage, committing numerous burglaries and killing another man in Baltimore before he was finally apprehended in Washington, D.C. While held in jail yet again prior to his trial for burglary, Carl voluntarily admitted to anyone who would listen about his previous crimes, including the murders of the young boys. Eventually, guards took notice of these claims and inquired to other jurisdictions. The numerous aliases Carl had used and the sheer amount of crimes that he had committed soon came to light. Carl befriended 26-year-old prison guard Henry Lesser due to his kinder treatment of him. Henry took interest in Carl, providing him the means to tell his story by giving him a pencil and paper. Carl wrote and gave Henry an articulate, extensive memoir of his crimes and his life philosophies, sharing his nihilistic and misanthropic views of the world. During his trial in November, Carl freely admitted to his crimes and acted in his own defense. As a result, he was quickly found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The prison he was to be serving the time in was, ironically, Fort Leavenworth. Upon his arrival, he informed the warden, T.B. White, that he would kill the first man to bother him. This led to the prison segregating him from the rest of the prisoners and assigning him to laundry duty so that he could work alone. However, Carl was not always alone. He was supervised by Robert Warnka, the prison laundry foreman, known for being hard and strict. On June 20th, 1929, Carl struck Robert to death with an iron bar while the man sat at his desk. Carl also attempted to attack other inmates who had witnessed the murder. Robert would be Carl Panzram's final murder victim. Carl went on trial on April 14th, 1930. As the trial went on, he would smile and taunt the witnesses who testified at his trial. It would only take 45 minutes for the jury to find him guilty and sentence him to death. In the months leading up to his execution, Carl refused to file any appeals and denied intervention by anti-death penalty and human rights activists. He rejected petitions for his sentence to be commuted, going as far as to write to then-President Herbert Hoover to ensure his sentence would not be changed. On September 22, 1930, Carl was removed from his cell at 5:55 a.m., being led to the gallows by guards. As he stood on the platform, the only witnesses were a handful of guards and reporters. Carl allegedly spat in the executioner's face as they placed the black hood over his head. When asked if he had any last words, Carl simply replied,
"Yes. Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around."
Karl Panzram was hanged at 6:03 a.m., dropping from the gallows 5.5 feet. He was officially pronounced dead at 6:18 a.m. at the age of 39. His body was not collected by next of kin, therefore he was buried in the Leavenworth Penitentiary Cemetery in row 6, grave 24. His headstone is marked only with his prisoner number, 31614. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to see more of my videos, please press on screen now. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel, because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.